not here. He said he was gonna come, but.
He told me he was gonna come. He's not sleeping, John.
That's okay. Okay, it is 7 o'clock. The special meeting of the Board of Finance is called to order. Please rise to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the
Yes, to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, with
liberty and justice for all.
justice for all.
Okay, Dan, why don't we pass those out? Tonight's budget night, we leave with a recommendation to the town. We usually have members of the Board of Selectmen here because we often care what they might think. You guys want to come sit here and listen like real people? No? You want to sit back there? Okay. All right. We do care. I'd like to put what we've got here in a frame of reference first. Tom Connor said, boy, I sure hope we can stay below the rate of inflation. Good question. So Dan has put together this spreadsheet with the rubric we have used, unofficial rubric we've used is we would encourage the Board of Selectmen not to, as they present us with the budget, not to exceed inflation plus growth in the grand list. We've talked about that for years. So in the 1, 2, 3, 4th, 5th column, we see for each of the last, 6 years, 7 years, inflation plus the growth in the grand list with both the average and the median of that period below. And then we have the increase in the local cost of government. Now, granted, we're responsible for the mill rate. The school gives us their budget, no control over that. The state provides us and the school with significant amounts of money, no control over that. Significant amounts of our income come from interest, which is based on interest rates and market performance. Nothing we can do about that. So our focus has always been on the local cost of government. So there's this one sheet as a background. We certainly are doing better than inflation. So the Board of Selectmen ought to feel good about that. Let's see. I asked Dan this morning, I said, what was the Selectmen's budget to us before the ambulance? Because the ambulance came at the 25th hour, surprised everybody. For years, for many years now, we have paid nothing for the ambulance, which is an anomaly. Most communities end up paying, as I mentioned last time, somewhere between $20 and $50 per capita is how the cost to support an ambulance service in a community. What's that, $35? This year, the total cost for an ambulance is $20 per capita. So our ambulance service is on the very low end of what communities pay. That said, it is an additional $395,000, $400,000. Before the ambulance, the budget increase was 3.15%. Pretty good, considering. I happen to think it's pretty good. 3.15, what you read in the paper, what we see here, that's pretty good. The Board of Selectmen, Jeff had just heard about it when he presented his budget, and he put $50,000 in because we knew there was going to be something, but there was no way to know what. By the time the Board of Selectmen got the budget, we knew the number was $395,000, broken into two pieces. $235,000 to support operating expenses, and $160,000 to support replacement of their ambulances and their physical property on a long-term basis. The Board of Selectmen was uncomfortable handing over $160,000 in property support, ambulances and physical property support, without some structure on it. And I think they're also concerned about the vetting of it. As we reported at our last meeting, since the vetting, I think most of you, I guess, agreed with Dan and me that $20 per capita, $400,000 is a good price, a good deal for this community. Members of the Board of Selectmen were very much concerned, as was also addressed by some members of our board, that giving them $160,000? $160,000 each year to put away in a fund so that when they needed to replace a roof on a building or an air conditioning system or buy a new ambulance or buy radios, for us to give them that without any formal relationship about what the controls might be on that deferred support. We wouldn't defer it, but they would have it and it would be deferred. So the Board of Selectmen did not recommend to us $160,000. We realized that to support an ambulance service long-term, you've got to replace the ambulances, and these are costs that need to be included. We talked with the auditors, and the auditors have agreed that we can fund we've got a name for it, a deferred budget support fund. We would defer our support of the fire department's annual operating budget for the amounts of money that would go into fixed things like replacing ambulances. And when they needed to replace an ambulance or fix their roof or do some capital thing, then it would be appropriate for us to send them that money. So what I asked Dan to do, and I also talked to several members of the Board of Selectmen, and they said, yes, they understand that long-term, the $160,000 average annual a year to replace ambulances and capital assets is appropriate, is needed, but it shouldn't be done unless there are conditions and processes in place to make sure it goes specifically for what we're saving it for. There is a draft of a memorandum, which I think I sent to John and Jeff and Dan. I don't know if I've sent it to the rest of you. It's really a Board of Selectmen thing, but I've sent it around, and it has 12 points on it that the town attorney, the Board of Selectmen, Dan from Fiscal, and the association, the Ambulance Association, and probably the fire department too, because they're a nonprofit that we buy assets for. So there is a draft of that circulating. And Dan has created, we have changed the Scott scuba gear. It's not scuba gear, it's SCBA. SCBA, it is SCBA. It's not underwater, it's above water, fireman air pack things. Not, yeah, okay. We have changed the name of that fund to, and this fund will operate the same way, but it'll have more things in it. It will have not only the scuba gear, which every 10 years costs $300,000, but would have the $160,000 a year going into it, into that fund for ambulances and other capital items when they're appropriate, subject to this memorandum of understanding that needs to be agreed upon. And I think we have that as a note in that fund, don't we? It says subject to
disbursements to NGO. Sorry. Yeah, we had put in the bottom as a sub disbursements to NGO conditioned upon compliance with the MOU.
So there will be an MEO, a memo of understanding. So what we did, and I asked Dan to do this so that we could put a framework around what we're doing. If you go to the bottom, can you go to the bottom of that sheet, please? See the lower right-hand corner, the 4.9%? Remember I said the Board of Selectmen, Jeff handed the Board of Selectmen a 3.15% increase. After you add $400,000 for the ambulance in both their operations, 235, and in this reserve fund for their capital needs, the annual amount of 160, you end up with a 4.9% increase. So that is what we're looking at tonight. We go from 3.15 before the ambulance to 4.9 after the ambulance. Let's go, okay, so we understand what inflation is. We understand what was 3.1, which was given to the Board of Selectmen, the addition of the ambulance. Dan, can we go to, let's go to the mill rate sheet. Or Betsy can do that. Can you make it a little bigger for us? Okay, move it a little bit to the left, okay? So the total, well, no, let's do, let me turn this thing on. Let's do let's do the revenues first. Because that's where we show the school. So we have our budget here in the lower left-hand corner, I think. See, the total town budget, which is that 4.9%, plus the Board of Education budget at 57,690 equals 81 million. That's this 81 million. After we subtract currently, Dan, is this the current number before the 200 or after?
That's before the 200. So it looks like with the governor's budget didn't pass, they're going to roll back to the two-year budget, which we were at 6.9 million. I just wanted to get confirmation, total confirmation from the state before we do that, before I change it. But it looks like that's what's going to happen.
We have to declare our budget before the state does theirs. Any number in here from the state is subject to change after tonight. So we take the most current credible information from credible people and put it in. So while we're not voting on the mill rate tonight, the school budget might change between now and the time we set a mill rate. We are voting on the town budget, but I think we all should see exactly what we're looking at and what the impact of a 3.5, 4.9 increase in local government is. So we have a whole series of revenues, and I think we went over most of those at our last meeting. So let's go to the top bets. So the total property taxes we need to raise are 68 million. Is that correct, Dan?
68,095,803.
60.
Correct.
Okay. Let's go to the mill rate calculation down here. So we have the 68,095. Now, we're not going to collect it all. We always have, no one ever collects 100% because some people don't pay their taxes. And that shortage in any one year often gets collected over time in the future, which shows up in the other revenue sections of revenues, back taxes. So, and we've got that calculation in for the last 5, 10 years, that what we expect in each year's grand list to be paid this year. So we need, this is what the cash we need. We're not going to collect 0.5%, so when we discount this by that, by this 99.5%, we have to create a mill rate based on 68.4, because we're not going to get some of it. We then have elderly tax benefit and a senior elderly circuit breaker benefit. Those items are tax breaks to people, so we still have to collect the money we still have to collect our 68 million. So we add these tax breaks to the amount of money we need to use in calculating the mill rate. So we need this much money. This is the grand list, 23.65765 rounded would be the mill rate. This is last year's mill rate, an increase of 1.157, which I think let's see, that is I think Dan worked this out, a 5.14% in the average house.
Yeah, the average tax increase for Southbury would be about 5.14%.
Yeah, so we come out, we start at 3.15, and I can't help but keep saying that because that's the fundamental cost of local government that the Board of Selectmen has control over. Then we add the ambulance, we add a school budget, we subtract the revenues to us and the school, which went down last year, so we're subtracting less, so that cost went up. And we're stuck with the perfect storm adding to inflation. So the net effect of all this is a 5% increase in the mill rate. We did revenues. Let's go to fund balance. One of the major things we do is we have an unassigned fund balance. If you look at the town books, we started the year with 8.4 per the auditors. We add and subtract other funds, the ARPA fund, which arrived in money after this was the 8,400,000 was calculated. We have to add in money that's in the pool fund put aside, but we're going to take it out over here. Anyway, so just math he is bound to do to keep these numbers in line with the books. Then we have the ARPA funds, the money that is coming, that comes in this current fiscal year. We're going to allocate it. It's not ours to spend. It's been appropriated. We can't use it for something else. And then we also have the first tranche of the $5 million, $5.7 million we got from the feds. That is included in this number. So the pot's right here. We've got $5,542,000 to start with. During the year, we had Dan anticipates a 2.3% unused in expenditures. We had a budget last year, a town budget of what, 22 million, is that what that is?
Yep, 22,524.
What, 22,520. And we had unexpended money there of $500,000, 2.36%. We got more money from the state and the feds than we could have imagined at this time. Plus interest rates were significantly higher for significantly longer, as you all know. So we ended up with $1.3 million in excess revenues for a total of $1.8 million total. We add that to the unassigned general fund we started with. We've got $7.4 million to deal with. Let's go down now. Okay, we got a bunch of things that we know are happening that need to be paid attention to. First, $375,000, that's this number, needs to be added to our rainy day fund because we're committed to keeping it at 7.58%. And when the base goes up, 7.58% increases, so we've got to fund that to put it in the rainy day fund. You may have read in the paper recently that the state recommends a rainy day fund of 16%. We're pikers. But we happen to have a what is it, double A1 rating,
We have AA1 rating.
the highest rating other than AAA you can get. Well, because how does this happen that we're so grossly underfunded in the rainy day fund? Well, we have a very high funding of our pension. We have a pay-as-you-go policy where we fund in advance our roads and our vehicles. And we get credit for that. So even though we're woefully short here, we're half of what it should be, the other things we do make it okay, according to, quote, the street, which is going to be important when the school budget goes out for bonds for, what, $6 million to do the renovations they just voted in, and a 40 or 50, their portion of a $100 million school project in the next 3-4 years, $40 million. That extra percent or 1.5% from having a great rating, it's going to be worth it. So we have our eye on that ball of keeping a good bond rating. So we also pay $441,000 of our current pension liability from our unassigned general fund. We know, because we budget conservatively, we're going to have a surplus each year. We're also committed to returning it to the taxpayers over a period of time. We'll get to that in a minute. And we need to fund things like our pension. I think it was 5 or 10 years ago, we decided we would take $400,000 out of the annual budget and pay it out of this unassigned general fund, therefore reducing the cost to the taxpayers and paying it out of our conservative budget process, because we know we're going to have a surplus, because we don't want to have a deficit. So that's what that number comes from. Vehicle replacements. We've got 2 pumper trucks, about $1 million each. I think the year after next, the year after next, or sometime in the next 2-3 years, the numbers we have in the fiscal plan are going to be short by about $300,000+ for each $1 million vehicle. From what we understand, it costs to replace these vehicles from what's going on out in the real world. So knowing that we're going to have to come up with probably, we don't, this is not exact, but something like $750,000 in addition to the $2 million we've already put away. We are, quote, earmarking that money, so the year after next, when we have to come up with that, the money's there. Next, our solar project, folks, Sustainable Southbury, for the last 3 years have been talking to us about solar energy. We've had several briefings on it, so has the Board of Selectmen. We have encouraged them to keep going. We have told them that we are not voting on it yet. It is not a done deal, but we told them that we would, rather than putting money in the annual budget, which we could but shouldn't do, because one, it's not sure, we don't know what the numbers are. So we earmark, knowing that in the probably the next year, if both Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance want to continue with that project, the money's there. Next, when we go to the bridge reserve, rather than tax for I think it's a one-time hit, we'll look at that in a few minutes. We've removed that from the annual cost, and we've got it in an earmark, so that if and when those numbers come in the way we think they might, the money is there. Next, you've all heard about River Road. We do not have a final number from the engineers. They have been talking to Jeff and Dan, and to put in a quality one-way traffic system on a temporary solution. I think we mentioned this last time. Probably going to cost $500,000 to $600,000. every day we wait, it's gonna cost more. So Dan and I decided we would recommend $600,000 here. Next, this is something Dan and I think we need to do, because in talking to the engineers, after we put a temporary solution in place, what is it, 1,900 feet of road is gonna have,
1,300 feet.
how much?
1,300.
1,300 feet of road is gonna have to be studied in depth to determine what kind of permanent solution we should engage in. So it just seemed to us that, and this is a number we just pulled out, put $100,000, because we have no idea what it's gonna cost for the engineers to figure out what kind of solution we should go to bid on to find out how much that's gonna cost. It's somewhere between 10 and $40 million, I suspect, depending on what kind of solution, how wide the road is. Jackson engineer, he can talk about
Not
that if he
40.
wants to. Not 40, 10 to 20? Don't know.
Don't know.
So we don't know, but we do know we're gonna have to figure it out, and we're gonna have to pay some engineers to give us some data to figure it out, so we're earmarking 100. And last but not least, when the fire department showed up at the, at their meeting, they handed us a letter. What was that, 3-4 weeks ago? And they said, here, there's a new OSHA standard, and we're gonna have to get 2 sets of turnout gear for every fireman, and every fireman is gonna have to have 1 set replaced every year. And each set of gear today costs, is it $5,600 for 60 people? Well, plus they've got an inventory, and they don't know how old the inventory is, and the new set of the gear for the first line people can't be more than 5 years old. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out exactly in the next 2 years what it's gonna cost to meet this new OSHA standard. We have a preliminary $5,800 each. We did a spreadsheet that accounted for all 60 firemen, and it looks like over the next 2 years, in addition to the annual replacement of 1 set of turnout gear every 5 years for 60 firemen, in order to get up to speed, to get everyone to get a second set, we're gonna need about $200,000. So next year, you'll find a recommendation where this number will be firmer. I suspect all these numbers will be firmer. These two are set. These are all subject to vagaries. So we start here with $7,400,000. We've got these earmarks, and we're left with $4,300,000. Our practice in the last 5 years is to phase that in over 4 years. Now, we phase it in a 40, 30, 20, 10% of this amount, of this amount basis, because the difference each year is $434,000 less hit on the grand list. We could, if you want, take $4,307,000 and apply it to next year's taxes. We could do that. What happens next year? You're going to be short a revenue source of $4,342,000. So we have taken this approach to gradually feed that back into the future grand lists. We've been doing this for decades now. Last year, using this rubric, we allocated $1.3 million from the unassigned fund as a revenue in the budget. This year, we've been encouraged by Mr. Riley to take more. We're going to assign $1.7 million, which is $381,000 more than last year.
But still 40%.
But still, yes, the 40% number results in a number that is $381,000 more revenue than last year. Can we go to the revenue
The
sheet?
last year number
Well-
must have been less than four. The last year number, excuse me, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
The last year number should have been more than that 4.3, excuse me, less than the 4.3 million that you started with.
Well,
The balance available, it must have been in the
This-
threes,
it was less. It was less.
even though the top number was 8.
Yes, yes. You've got to go back and look at the financial statements, the 8 million that we
Yeah,
started with, which is, well, you got to go look at that, but yes,
We'd have
you're
to
correct.
look at this sheet from last year.
Yes.
Okay.
So last year at this time, we didn't have 4,000,003. We took 40, well, someone can divide 1,344,000 by 0.4, and you'll know how much we, by 0.6 or 0.4? You'll know what we had last year. Okay, so let's go back to the revenue sheet now, remember this, 1,355,000 was the number we saw last year, and 1,737,000. That's where the 1,737,000 comes from. I'm getting tired of talking. Someone should ask a question or make an observation. Oh, you did? Okay, I hope you got a satisfactory answer
I did, to that question.
to that
Yes.
one.
Last year, Jack, we had 3,389,085 was our estimated unassigned fund balance.
3,000,003, not
$2,000
4,000,003.
long.
Close enough. So I wanted you all to get a framework of where the revenues come from, what the tax increase might be, what the perfect storm of less money from the state. You saw the state money. Did we get more from the state this year?
We did.
We did. We finally did get more from the state. The school got less from the state, for some reason, which hurt. The school, I think, had a 4.9% increase in their expenses. A 4.9% increase in their expenses, but they got significantly less money from the state, so they had a 5.3 or 5 point something percent net increase compared to the prior year. And then we got more kids, so we end up with a I think it was a 7.1% increase in the school budget after,
497.
4.97.
And then reduction in revenue got them to 5.8.
Okay, and then because there was less money from the state, it ends up with a 5.8% increase over last year, net, because the money they got to support their increase went down. And then because of the shift in population, this year, the school budget, as of now, costs us 7.05% more. Middlebury is 3.5. The last 2 years, it's been the reverse. We've had 3+ % increases, and Middlebury's been hammered. So that's the framework. Someone should ask a question. Yeah, Steve.
Well, just a quick
Sure.
point or question, observation, you're talking about the surplus drawdown that is built into the budget, but as we go throughout the year and we realize, maybe increased revenue savings on some of the expenditures, and that's why you see the actual for 22, 23, actual for this current year, that the surplus drawdown is not being used. So it's built in now as almost like a mill rate mitigation, if you will. But as we go throughout the year, that's why you see it, zero, that it's not actually being taken.
Yeah, what happens for government accounting, we leave that on there as a revenue, but we don't use it. We keep that at zero. So if you look, there's actually a shortfall on our financials between our revenues and expenditures by that amount. And we utilize that as a basis for truing up the expenditures to revenue.
Quirk in government accounting, they don't let us show it as a revenue. We show it as a deficit offset at the end.
That- Yeah.
Government accounting, sorry. Jack, go ahead.
Did you seat an alternate? Do we need to seat an alternate for voting purposes tonight?
Oh, I'm sorry. One, two,
Tom's on the line, but not Brian.
I'm sorry. That wasn't on the list, so I forgot. Kim, you were voting alternate. You're voting tonight. And you're a full member, right? No. Why can't I keep this straight?
They're the alternates.
Oh, so Tom, I'm sorry, stop.
Tom's
Tom
on the
Connor
phone,
is here,
so-
so you're not a voting alternate. I'm sorry, Tom, I didn't see your little cube in the right-hand corner of the screen. So we have 1, 2, 3.
Is Brian
And
on? Brian's on.
Brian's not on.
Brian is not on. He was going to be here, but he isn't. So who was voted last time? You guys keep track of this.
Casey
That
voted
was
because
you?
I had no voice.
You're up, Steve.
Right.
So if there are no objections, Steve will be a voting member tonight. But Kim, you and Casey are, please participate to the fullest extent. Okay, now, was there,
No.
okay, we did that. That was your question? Oh, you must have something, Jack. Come on.
I'll still keep.
Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I still have one big picture question about the reassessment. You
About the
know,
what?
The reassessment a year ago,
Oh,
and its impact. If the overall reassessment, so that 5.14 and the mill rate, that incorporates that, is that correct?
Yes.
it does. It's based on the same grand list plus 0.5% of growth that we used last year, yes.
Okay, and the total reassessment, how much bigger was the total reassessment than like 5 years ago?
I was not prepared to address that.
I mean,
Diane?
get
I'm
that.
just curious about how the reassess, I mean, it seemed to me if the total reassessment goes up significantly, then the mill rate shouldn't have to absorb as much. But I may just be confused about that.
What the reassessment does, it shifts the burden from one group of people to another. Because my house went up a lot and your house went up a little, well then when we apply a uniform mill rate to both of our houses, I pay more and you pay less. That is.
So again, that's what we've always said. I'm still a little unclear about that. So the assessment only impacts a percentage of what we pay. Like if the total value of the town went up twice, doubled, I would have thought that a constant mill rate would raise more funds.
John?
Yes, John?
If you look at this and you figure out how we get the mill rate, we first start with two things. What's the grand list and what's the budget? It's a simple thing. You take the budget, you look at the grand list, say how much do you have to raise based on these values to raise the amount of money in a budget.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I just would have thought that say if the assessment, I don't know what exactly assessment did, but the assessment doubled, the grand list would by itself go up.
It did.
It did last year.
It went way
Yeah.
up last year.
I don't want to put words,
went up
but
40
Tom, I think what you're asking is,
It went up by 600, it went up from
Oh,
2,232,838 to
Yeah.
2,885,553, Tom, last year.
I think Tom's point, but correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, is he's saying, after revaluation and we look at the higher values, you should be able to raise the same amount of money, if not more, with a lower mill rate number. So why is the mill rate that we're seeing it?
And we did that last year. The mill rate,
Went down 4 points.
it went from
mill rate
2.9,
So last year was
2.6
realized
to
in last
2.2.
year's mill rate.
26
Okay.
to 22. So last year's
Okay.
mill rate.
Okay, so it was actualized in last year's mill rate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
okay,
sorry,
done.
yes. I thought you were going much deeper. No. Last year, we
No,
got
I
the
just want
reduction
to
of a
be
lower
clear
mill
about
rate.
that. The 5%, it has nothing to do, it's just last year over this year, it's got nothing to do with any mill rate change, I mean, with any assessment changes. correct?
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct.
That was factored in last year, Tom, with the reval.
Okay, great. That's my point, or my asked question.
John, just one or two things. First of all, let's talk about on the revenue side and so forth. Now, I've seen in the press and on the TV that, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the Appropriations and Bonding Committee in Hartford refused to send any changes to state aid or anything like that up to the governor's office. And that basically said that everybody, while some people were expecting a decrease, and the school said they would expect, and they were told they would get a decrease, everybody will get the same amount for 24-25 that they did for 23-24. Now, from what Dan tells me, that gives us another $200,000 that we had not figured into the revenue side of this, because they cut our educational aid, okay? The other thing, and, you know, I've talked to this before, I know, and, you know, Jeff and I think different about some of these things, but I know that Dan's initial budget did have a very small amount of money, $30,000, put aside to retain a grant consultant, okay? Now, I constantly look at what's in the paper, and I see Woodbury gets $6 million to do road work from the state and the feds combined, that we pay for out of our road work budget that we put aside all the time, okay? To me, $30,000, when we are now working with $200,000 more in revenue, that $30,000, even in and of itself, is not going to affect the grant list. And at some point, we do, and I think the administration and the town and this board does a fabulous job of managing the expense side, okay? But the revenues need some support. Right now, my understanding is that grants now fall under, and searching for grants, now fall under the responsibility of the individual department managers, who have got their hands full already working and managing their staff and what has to be done. I just ask, isn't it worth 30 grand, which is not going to affect the mill rate, which is already going to go down because we're going to get another $200,000 from Hartford, okay, in aid. I would like to see that $30,000 put back and at least make some type of an effort to start to build the revenue side of the business here.
John, do we know what Woodbury does?
Excuse me?
John,
Do we know?
I don't know how Woodbury manages it, but what I have seen is it's not only Woodbury. I see consistently in the paper that local towns are getting some significant grants. And the last time I recall us getting a grant for anything was for a senior bus, okay, which was $30,000 or something like that. Peanuts.
whatever.
Whatever. What I'm saying is, I think we really start to have to, you know, and not go overboard, but begin to explore some ways that we can grow the revenue side here. And to me, a $30,000 commitment to a consultant that could help us, and it doesn't cost anything except a consulting fee. There are no income, and there's no taxes, and there's no pension or anything like that we have to pay on that. To me, that is more than a reasonable investment in trying to start some growth on the revenue side.
The guy who removed the $30,000 from the budget is here. Jeff, you want to come talk to us for a second about $30,000 for a grant writer?
It's not a grant writer, it's a grant consultant that searches for the grants.
A grant consultant, thank you. Was that removed, or?
In my budget, was it in there to begin, Dan?
$25,000 that was taken out on the Board of Finance professional services line, which was for a grant writing consultant.
Could you bring it up for us?
Yep,
Is
it's
it-
right there, John.
Where is it?
So you see the grayed out one right there.
This
that
one right here?
Yep.
So that is on the professional services side of the Board of Finance.
Oops.
That's the Board of Finance right there. So we had an initial of 47.5.
There's the 25.
There's the 25.
And what's it read there?
We didn't have enough information at the time as to what we were gonna do, go through CCM, or were we gonna?
Betsy, a little bigger?
And what was the history of spending that?
We've never had a grant consultant, a grant writing consultant.
So a grant writing consultant? Because we've been doing most of the grant writing that we do in-house.
I think that is what I guess the misunderstanding was. John wants the town to retain a grant searcher, someone who searches federal and state databases for grants. And if there is a grant that we might be available to, then we would follow our process of writing a request for the grant.
Or
Is
you
that
could go
correct?
to the grant person to write the grant, but the main thing is to know what's out there and find out what the opportunities are and what we might be able to capitalize on. And right now, we don't do that. I mean, the last grant I saw, because all grants have to come before us for some type of a review. The last one was a bus and that was a couple of years ago.
We do have a couple in the queue right now, John. We have one for the senior center. We did apply-
75,000.
70 Yeah, 90,000 for the senior center.
Yeah.
for
Really?
capital
A $90,000
improvements.
grant?
Yeah. And then we had written one for the trails grant, which would have been 600,000.
Yeah, but we
But
put
we
it
got-
in, but it wasn't awarded
Wasn't
to us,
awarded.
but it's in for the next round for the Trails Grant, which is up along New Wheeler Road. We also had gotten money from the federal government for a walkway. What was that amount, Dan, the poverty?
400, it was about $400,000.
For the walkway to
Walkway.
make the connection
Yep.
there. I don't know what Woodbury's grant was for, or what particular, I'd like to know what that is, because it could be, I have no idea where they're getting that money for, why they would get a high road grant.
I think they bonded $6 million. I don't think they got a grant for it, John.
They did bond.
They bonded that.
Watertown
I-
also had a
I-
big road bond
And
recently.
I guess John has been asking about this for quite some time, and the Board of Finance, thank you, Dan, remembered that and put it in, quote, our request to the first selectman, and first selectman is scratching his head. And I guess you're telling us that we've got grants in the pipeline,
Yes.
so you don't think we need a grant searcher who might write?
We get grants sent, we get opportunities sent to us by email from CCM, COG, a number of places. It comes through on emails, and what I do is then I look at them, distribute them to whichever department. Is this of value to the department, whether it's the senior center, or, I think that's how we went with the it's technically ARPA grant money for the senior center. It came across, sent it to our director. Is this of interest? Is this something we can use? Putting up them to do the research for what application that would be for their department. And then we did a grant one time. We had to put it together pretty quickly. And my office put the grant together and got it out in time.
We did the steep grant for which we just got for the transfer station, which was about $225,000, I think, for the reallocation of the transfer station.
We're
There was a few
capable
in
of,
the pipeline.
So
Could we dedicate some time to benchmark against area towns to see if indeed our behavior is different than the other towns, or whether they're doing something different?
Yeah, I
And,
think that's probably,
and get a report back, I mean, that has data as opposed to,
I think that's a good point, and I think that's why when we were putting Jeff's budget together, it came out was because we just didn't have enough data at that time. So probably would be a good thing to look at. Jeff does have professional services in his line too, that if we wanted to retain someone for a grant writer, we could do that. But yeah, we just needed more data before we did anything.
I think we got a difference here between grant writers and grant searchers. It seems like when, through COG or the state, or this COG or the state, word goes out that grant money is available, we go after it. We see what they say there might be grants available for, and then we'll have our own people write the grant. I know I have a friend who on the Board of Finance in Woodbury talked to me yesterday, and asked what we did about grant writers and grant searchers. And I told him, we don't. And he said, oh, okay. So I know Woodbury is looking at this same thing. Whether it's a grant searcher or a grant writer, I don't know. It seems, I guess what I'm hearing from Jeff, and we haven't rehearsed this, is when grants come our way, we have the skill set to apply for them. We have to apply for the grant. We're having, when grants are available through COG or through the state, and COG deals with the federal government and or the state, I don't know, but there have been several opportunities that we have taken advantage of. So I guess the question is, if we were to hire a grant searcher for $25,000, what would the productivity be? I certainly don't know. But what other communities do would certainly be of interest. How many other communities have grant searchers and or grant writers?
so we also know that, we know with this community connectivity grant, there's a difference between the connectivity grant and one section will qualify for connectivity grant and specifically up New Wheeler, and I just had the discussion with COG today about some more grants coming out to make a connectivity between, for alternative transportation, which means walking, biking, things of this nature. That doesn't necessarily fit under the grant program for our trails grant that are going to connect with that, but not a connectivity grant. So we'll go after the trails grants with the state to get money, because there's money for trails grants. So all these grants are different, and you have to fit it. What we did with the connectivity grant is we know that the engineering firm of SLR had written a lot of these grants, and we used them to write the grant to fit our application to make it attractive to get approved. So we're waiting for the next rounds of these grants to be coming out for approval.
Okay, I guess we don't have all the information we would like vis-a-vis benchmarking, and Jack is asking that you guys do that over the next year.
for the next couple of months.
It won't arrive in the budget, because
understand.
tonight is the night. So for this round, at this point in this round, any such benchmarking wouldn't be helpful. And you've heard the discussion. What do you guys think? Tom, Steve, Kim, Kathy? One way or the other? Yes, no?
John?
Well, I've been in sort of John's camp on this for a while, but it's all to me sort of hearsay. So I kind of, I favor what Jack is saying. I'd like to see a more systematic discussion of it before I say do anything. Is the 25 grand to get to a more systematic discussion of it?
I don't know if it gets you to a systematic discussion just because you put money in there. Again, I have professional services line that can be used. If, you know, again, when we went to the engineering firm to apply for the grant, we can use professional services to apply for that grant as an on-call engineering firm.
I think applying for grants, it was a poor choice of word. The understanding here is to hire someone who will search for grants. Is that not what you're talking about, John? Or do you think we need someone to help us write grants?
Probably both, right?
Well, I was thinking we need somebody to get us a better perspective on, are we doing the grant thing well?
Yeah,
But
I agree with Tom and Jack on this as well, and I think that we probably should do a little benchmarking to other towns to see what they do and what they've gotten, and then we come up with a better plan.
Yeah, I'm comfortable on that.
Okay,
I'm really comfortable on that, because at least we're moving and we're beginning to look at it,
moving in the right direction, yes, okay.
going in the right direction.
Okay, so
Do we
Steve,
have-
unless, yes, Kathy?
Do we have any data as to how many grants we've applied for and how many we didn't get? How many we did get? Any of that kind of statistics? I'm
We could
just like-
probably, I could probably put something together, Kathy.
We should look, since Dan's been here, that should be part of this benchmarking thing. What's out there and what have we
Start with
done?
the information we do have.
Right. Steve?
I guess just wanted to make sure, again, for clarification, if we're saying that we have a professional services line in the first selectman's office, then, and we are saying that it is possible that we could use that for something like this, then we don't necessarily need to add back what was taken out from the Board of Finance line.
I think he's telling, practically what Jeff is saying, if knowledge of a grant comes our way, he has used and can use professional services to write the grant. The other half, I think, of what John is getting at is searching for grants. And I don't think Jeff is spending money commissioning someone to go look for grants. That's what I'm hearing.
I do
We're
think,
generally using the COG, which is aware of all the grants, and a lot of them are environmental, but they let us know about these grants, so the CCM, and then there's it comes to the towns and municipalities, and you vet them through to like the ARPA money, which is really a grant, but the ARPA money for the senior center. It's nice to know it's there, but okay, so what can you use it for, and what are we gonna use it for? And, you know, there's restrictions on certain stuff, but yeah, that's what we do right now.
That answer the question? Clear up what we do
sort
and
of,
don't do?
I mean, I do think just from a big picture standpoint, there is something to be said. You know, a lot of municipalities do nowadays employ either a grant writer, grant specialist, whatever title you want to use. If it would give, you know, majority of us a further level of comfort to sort of look around and say, all right, what similarly sized towns as ours, what do they do? Because we don't want to be the outlier and seen as the taxpayers as, you know, going off on some grand experiment that other towns comparable to us don't do. Fair enough, but I think to John's point, it's something that maybe we need to start talking about and exploring. And if there is going to be funding to be used, I just want to make sure there is something somewhere that we may get to a point and say, well, we can use some of this for that person.
And as we look at this, it could be even budget neutral, like you say, because a grant writer should be able to bring in enough revenue to cover
Should bring in
cost of
more
the.
revenue than you spend for it.
So why don't we do this? Could we put as a permanent item on our agenda, under old business, a grant study, thank you. A grant study.
Grant process study.
Yes.
For additional context, when I was on the NVCOG, oftentimes grants were restricted to already identified needs in the town, and it had to show up in one of your planning documents. So if your planning document didn't already say that you needed to do this improvement, you were already shut out of a number of grants. So having someone or anybody who could possibly identify what those types of grants are and then make sure that we're prepared for being able to apply for them in the future, if they have those requirements, might be very helpful. I agree.
Which is the trail connectivity grant that we went for, but also the plan, the master plan of, I think there's 23 sections, and each one it's identified as a goal for connecting the community. Part of the problem is most of the grants for connecting communities today are what other communities are you connecting to on their system. I had that conversation today with Naugatuck Council of Government, one of the gentlemen. The problem for Southbury, it's difficult for us to connect our trail to Middlebury or Naugatuck. It's just the demographics. So that is out there, and we do have that master plan with all that 23 locations as a concept, and now we can start applying for more of the grants as they come available.
I don't know if the Board of Finance has officially seen this trail grant. Have we seen that? I've seen it, but I don't know if you guys have. At our next meeting, at our May meeting, could you bring that map with the 23 sections so we
I
could
think
see
it's
it?
23, yeah.
Whatever it is.
I can
Okay.
actually forward the map to everyone before that as well. 'cause I
Yeah,
have it
so
with
you
all-
can
with
see-
all the segments and the.
To Kim's point, there is a idea for a huge connectivity thing with different parts of our community, which answers the question, yeah, we have thinking something needs funding, at least one anyway.
And we even got I think there's a rough what could the cost be for each,
Piece.
roughly each section? We don't know, but a rough idea of, I think, Jack, were you involved in that? There was a rough section.
That was me.
If we look at the capital, it's
Debt
actually in
service.
there, the rough section's actually in the debt service line. We had,
Can you go to the debt service line
we went out and we had someone walk the whole trail.
right there, Bets?
And they came up
There you
with the,
got it.
it's in by segment, so if you go to
And then
the
go-
debt service plan.
That's right. Go to the left. Right
So 20,
here.
it came to 21 segments at 3 million, total of $3 million. And then the map that I'll send out will show those, the price of each segment.
The first selectman has designed a huge loop that connects downtown, the village, a whole bunch of 23 different areas. And our Public Works Director has walked it with others, and they have a financial plan for each one of the 23 sections, what it might cost to do each piece, what it would entail. So, okay.
John, just one other thing for the end. Maybe a good way to start this is to talk to COG. They will probably know which towns are using this type of professional, okay? Because they know what towns are doing. And that will give you an idea of maybe who to talk to and what their experience was. And over a period of time, what's the amount of what they're paying for the grant searching or whatever grant consulting service versus what they have got in grants.
It's a good idea.
And-
That's a good idea, John.
And what kind of increase have they found in that type of relationship since they put on a professional to help them with this?
We will keep working on that. Any other comments or questions people have? Jack?
Can the $200,000 that John just brought up be incorporated into the budget? The additional state money?
Two
Yeah,
hundred
we could
thousand
put
or
in
20?
the ECS, money.
It would be a revenue piece that
A
would
revenue
lower the
side.
mill rate. It was not a disbursement item. And tonight, we're voting on disbursements only.
Will we know about it
I,
at the time of the mill rate vote?
yes. I reached out to CCM, the budget representative at CCM, and I haven't heard back from him, but I did reach out to Joe Martino at the region today, and he said, yes, we were gonna get the additional ECS based upon what he heard. So until I get definitive confirmation from the Hartford, I didn't wanna change the budget yet.
But that's all on the school side, too. I mean, that's kind of on
That's
the
a revenue side for
revenue
us.
associated with the school system, not the municipal budget.
Yes.
Okay.
No, sorry.
Or
we
is
get-
it
we-
200 is us.
200 is
us.
us.
The school may be getting more, we don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I don't know. I suspect they might because they got less in what they
Yeah, they had a
projected.
reduction in the
And if the
budget.
governor said, no, everything goes back to the way it was, as long as he's not parsing it differently, they would get the same. And that would change, again, a piece in the mill rate calculation that we don't control.
But it will be adjustments that you think we'll be able to make before
Yes, we
the
set the
mill
mill
rate
rate.
vote.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's not something that we're going to talk about as we present a budget
Correct.
to the voters.
Unless, and I'm going to ask Dan now, can you and Betsy go take that, can you go back to the, I guess, the revenue sheet? Could you increment that by $200,000 and dynamically work its way through, Dan?
I can.
Could you go do that with Betsy, or,
I can do it right here.
oh, you're on a copy?
I can do it right here.
Oh, that's not live? Oh,
But Dan's
here,
live.
Dan can do it.
And tell us the answer.
So
So,
prior,
let's go-
prior to the,
Let's go to the mill rate sheet.
the mill rate prior to was 23.657. If we add $200,000 to the ECS revenue portion, the mill rate becomes 23.588.
Would be what?
23.5888.
588.
It was 23.657.
It's down a tenth,
So down to 10.
well, which is 200,000.
The tax rate,
Round
the
down.
increase in taxes would go to 4.84.
2.6 to 2.5, yeah, tenth of a mil.
And then the tax increase would go to 5.84 based upon that.
This would be what?
4.84.
4.84.
I would have thought it would be a 2/10 change.
Well, see
200,000
the
is
grand list here?
1% of the budget. Oh,
The
yeah,
grand list.
Wrong number.
2,000,009
I
is,
got to use the 80
Yeah.
million number, not the 23
it's the
number.
grand list. So, we're probably looking at what, 4.84
4.84.
at this point with all these things? Okay, any other questions or thoughts? If not, go ahead.
Can I ramble for a second? Maybe?
Sure.
Maybe. My sense is there's discomfort in a lot of places about the budget. There's a lot of discomfort about the school number of what will be 7%. Your sheet showed inflation of 8 this year. My number's more like 3 for this year. 8 was a year or two ago, but maybe there's a lag or something there. Most of the school budgets are coming in the 3-4 range, not 5. That then,
The fours.
and, you know, a percentage point or two less than what Region 15's coming in at. But we don't have any say over that. On the municipal budget side, I was very pleased with the 3-1 that Jeff originally came forward with. Unfortunately, and the 3-1 is founded in part because of the superb anticipation of expenses, planning, and dealing with the lumpy things so that we have a reasonably smooth budget progression year after year, decade after decade. And that's to the credit of you, John, and this board and everybody that works on the budget. Unfortunately, we've had two surprises in the last 4 months, 6 months. River Road, and by my math, River Road adds about $300,000 to this budget. If you take the 700 and you multiply it times the 40%, that's roughly a $300,000 impact. And the ambulance is $400,000.
Yeah.
So it's actually adding 700,000, those two items are adding $700,000 to this budget. And they're not things that we had necessarily, they're not things we had planned for or anticipated. How do you plan for River Road failure? You don't. We've spent a lot of time planning for other kinds of road, culvert, bridge failures. And the ambulance is kind of a confluence of a whole lot of things that we've talked about over the last three meetings. The thing I struggle with is, given the way we do anticipate and plan, and given that there are surprises, both good and bad, periodically, is there a way to more completely cover some of those, the two one-time surprises in this year's budget with anticipation of other things so that we don't have to hit the taxpayers this year?
So my thoughts on that, Jack, are two things. It's my hope, prior to the damage from COVID and EMTs and paramedics not going into the field, people not going into it, I'm hoping that that recovers over time. And that's the problem, is it takes time, it takes training. The second thing is, if you look at Medicare, Medicaid rates that increased 15%, I think the real number that the government has to deal with is 30% increase to the people with Medicare and Medicaid. Understanding their budgetary constraints, they can't just add 30% to the reimbursement. So I think 15% was quite a stride, though not complete.
Right.
And my hope is that that will continue again to get those rates up so that the ambulances, for-profit, not-for-profit, will become self-sustaining again. And hopefully, the ambulance issue becomes less of an issue on that side. We're going to plan for the worst, but that's kind of my hope on that side.
Wait, and just taking that one for a second, that would further fuel my request, because if it is a 1 year or a 2 year problem, then it may be something we could accommodate rather than an up and down within our financial planning process.
The second thing, while I've got
Go
the
ahead.
thought process
Go ahead.
going, is part of the problem too here is the shift in students. So there's always been a shift, and I don't know how to do this, but the thought came to me, is there a way in the budget that we, nobody likes a dramatic change. When you look at our overall budgets over the last 9 years and inflation, we've done very, very well, all in all. It's the shift at this time that is bothering us. In the theory we've always followed is, okay, so how would you control that shift back and forth between Middlebury and Southbury, which is always a problem for Middlebury, and it's always a problem for Southbury. We're always, how great this is this year because Middlebury's getting hit. Then the next year, we're the ones. Is there a way to smooth that out for both our budgetary? Because if you had a smoothing out of that allocation, which, do you do it based on a 5-year turn? Or do we reserve for that change back and forth? Is there a way to look at that and say, I don't know how we could do that, how we can control that? You're asking me to talk about it.
No, I understand.
And you're putting me, I've had all of 5 minutes sitting in the audience to think about this. But if you don't talk about it and put it out there, it may not be practical, it may not be reasonable, but I think it's something, do we discuss how we can do that?
Yeah.
And Jack-
Well,
My
I
concern, though, is,
mean-
is more the municipal budget and the $700,000 that are hitting us this year.
What we had, Jack, is 2 years ago, we had $280,000 in the budget for ambulance service, so $285,000. And when Southbury Ambulance came to the town and said they could take the full town on and the paramedic, it was unexpected what was gonna happen with the cost of EMTs. So for 2 years, the town virtually paid zero for ambulance service. So had we kept that 285 in the budget with a gradual increase, we might be closer to the 3, something that we have in there right now. For River Road,
So, hey, Dan, why did we pull it?
well, we pulled it because Southbury Ambulance came to us, Tom, and said they could do the full ambulance service without any cost to the town, which at the time they thought they could because EMTs were $40 an hour, and within 2 years they went to 80.
Let me offer a thought about the ambulance. Having done the deep dive in this and convinced the rest of you that $400,000 is a solid number, a couple of things surprised me about it. First of all was that at $20 per capita, we have 20,000 people in Southbury. At $20 per capita, the town's support is $20 for every person in town, $400,000. Except for some outliers dealing with politics and unions and regionalization, things that is not on our radar at this time. We're at the low end of what the 9 communities we studied are supporting. So I'm not sanguine about that 400 going away. That said, Jerry was doing okay until 2 things. The cost of paramedics just blew everything out of the water all over the country, and you see that in the front page of the Waterbury paper, the New York Times, and on CNN. That's the cost side. We all talked about 6 months, 9 months ago, that the people who fund this, which is the insurance companies, the state government, the federal government, are going to have to do something about it because you can't have ambulance services unless you cover the costs. And the free enterprise system is driving 70%, 80% of their cost is labor and benefits, just like almost all government. We had hoped that we could be a bridge. I think this is to Jack's point. The $284,000 was going to be a bridge until the revenue stream from the state and the federal government and the commercial payers covered that deficit. Well,
We don't know.
I'm not sanguine about that either.
Well, okay, but I guess, to Jack's point, okay, and it's mostly 2020 hindsight now, but I guess the question is, why did we yank funding out of those things previously? I mean, even if they're a little bit shaky in terms of their rationale.
Well, we yanked it because she was anxious to get us to sign off and give her the authority she needed with the state so she could be fully in charge. And she said,
Okay.
I can do it. Give me the okay. She did say, I'm 90% sure I can do it. She did say that. I remember that. But she wanted a shot at doing it. She guessed wrong. And if $40, $35 per capita is the standard, $20 is a bargain. And I don't know what, Jack, on that one, how we could have anticipated it.
I know the amount of effort that went into the analysis for this year. And I'm not any better at the crystal ball on what next year or the following year is than you or Jeff. In fact, I'm probably much further away from it than either one of you on whether the feds will come forward with another 15% that covers a large chunk of that $400,000, or whether they go back to a 3% inflation and that $400,000 ends up being built in our budget for the next 15 years. My issue is that we've shown in our, or my concern or my question is that we've shown that in our planning, we can anticipate and deal with bumps and bruises along the road.
And make adjustments.
Maybe even including some of the unseen ones. Let me give you a far out example. If Blake and his team are gonna be doing River Road this year, and it's gonna be 2, 3, 4 months of effort for them to get that going, we know we're gonna see some savings on the Purchase Brook Bridge, or we think we can. I don't know what that number is. I suspect we may underspend in a bunch of other areas. Does that represent an offset that helps soften the burden that we just haven't anticipated in the budget? Because those were the River Road budget, the 600 and the 100, was developed entirely outside of the budget process that Blake and his team put together for roads and bridges.
Right.
But some things aren't gonna probably happen this year if they're gonna spend 4 months down on River Road getting that one lane open. I don't know what that number might be, but there might be a couple of $100,000 of offset there. And my consternation is the difference between the 3.1, from a municipal budget standpoint only. It's the difference between the 3.1, which is consistent with inflation this year, I think, and 4.9, which is a couple of points higher. Is there a way, as you know, the 200,000 that John brought up would be sort of an offset to that, half of that difference. If there was a couple of $100,000 in bridges and roads because we're going to be working on River Road, then that increase effectively comes back to the 3.1 that Jeff originally proposed, and we're absorbing some of these surprises for the taxpayer.
Let me answer this. Could you go, well, I want to go to the road thing, the timing, because I think we already did that, but we'll get there in a minute. Jack said there's $300,000 that it's costing the town people this year because of this 600.
Yeah,
I wanna
600 and the 100.
These two items, this $700,000,
Yeah.
if this were not here, then this number would be higher by that, and this number would be higher by 40% of that number. So this 700,000 times 40% is 280. That's where he comes and reminds us that while we're putting away this 700 and it doesn't go into the budget, it does come off of, on the disbursement side, it does lower the revenues we apply to the budget. Remember the 7.3? If that were higher by 40% of 700, 280, the number would be 2 million, and it works through the scheme, and we would be less. On the other side, because there is no free lunch, we're not going to have to put $700,000 in this year's budget. So that's a huge savings by not doing that. And it cost us in disbursements, but it cost us 280 in revenues. So we're only saving the net between the two. And to this trying to anticipate, because Jack talks about that, how can we anticipate the unanticipatable? Well, what Dan and we've been doing for decades is, well, us for decades, and Dan in the recent past, is we sit down at the budget time and said, what on earth are we facing? What could happen? And we start thinking about things, and we end up anticipating them, and then funding them out of our annual surplus, not funding them through increases in the budget. So that's how all that comes together. Can you go to the road budget? Because Jack talked about doing something about the $200,000. The details of it, Dan, can you
You go
tell
to
us?
the Roads tab, Betsy, there, that's
Roads,
the
okay,
roads.
stop, right here. You want to make that bigger? Oh, bigger, yeah, okay, now up just a little. Okay, now bring it up, there you go. See these two roads? They're in the budget for next year and the year after. That was not the case when Jeff started out. Both those items were over here. And because we wanted to smooth out the costs, we moved this item to here. But so what does that mean? Let's go down to the bottom now. So in the road program this year, we have 4,000,009, which includes one of those. It was, when Jeff started out, a million, did I say 4,000,009? It was 1,000,007. Can you try and get those two numbers on the screen at the same time? The 1,000,004 and what was up here? That's good.
Keep going. Up a little more.
Oh, up a little more?
Just a little more. Keep going.
Keep that,
There it is.
there you go.
221.
This number was not in this number on this plan. This number was over here. So Jeff took out the 2,000,002, this to Jack's point, he probably didn't know we did this. This number was 1,000,007. Okay, and we moved it to next year. Let's go back,
Those two columns are?
say again?
Scroll back up to the top just to see the
Sure.
column labels. Okay.
Okay, let's go to the road program. Can we go back to the main budget? Remember that 1,000,004 we just looked at? This 1,000,004 was before the department request came in, was 1,000,007, because they had those two roads, I think where they were last year. And Jeff said, no, we're gonna do it next year. And that goes to Jack's specific point, and we got concurrence from the Public Works Director. He couldn't be doing those two roads this year and do the River Road stuff.
Was that done after River Road came up? I don't remember the timing, but.
It was about the same time,
It,
Jay.
it,
Yeah.
it came, we knew River Road was gonna happen. Yes, it was in December. We knew things were going to hell in River
Yeah, but
Road.
we didn't make the plan to have Public Works doing the one lane until
Not until after.
a month and a half
Yeah,
ago.
it was about a month and a half ago.
I remember sitting with Dan and talking with Blake about whether or not we should move that one road to the next year to lower this cost.
I remember the conversation, I just don't remember the timing of it. Whether they were linked or whether they were two independent
They were two
ships passing in the night.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I use roads as the Purchase Brook
Yeah.
Bridge, potential savings there, and other things that Blake may not be doing, only as a potential source of offset to that to that $300,000 impact of River Road on this year. I'm just asking the
Okay.
question, is there a way we could deal with $400,000 of these surprises within our accrual accounting methodology, because they are one-time deals? No, they weren't anticipated, but we sometimes have surprises. We know we got some
Let me-
favorable surprises coming. Hang on just one second. Some
That's okay.
favorable surprises probably coming with Blake's new approach to bridges, culverts,
Absolutely.
that are not anticipated in here because we don't have any details yet. But is there a way that within the methodology, we could handle the surprises this year? One of the two surprises this year that would bring us back to the 3.1 budget that Jeff started with, or very close to it, rather than the 4.9.
So Jack, can I ask?
Sure.
Do you mean like adding as an earmark to our unassigned fund, like we have the additional vehicle replacement funding, the solar project funding, the bridge reserve funding, River Road and fire turnout gear. I mean, all of those things are expenses that we anticipate,
Right.
but didn't necessarily expect to continue forever, right? So
But so-
we're kind
but
of like
some things-
covering the gap with those, so
Some
could
thing-
that be an answer?
That could be part of it. Some of it could be that we've got $750,000 in there for a culvert that we are now learning might only be $400,000.
Right, so
That reduces-
re-estimating the culvert, for
Well,
instance.
rethinking.
Okay.
Blake and his team are very entrepreneurial, I think, and forward-thinking in trying to figure out what's the most efficient way. You know, we've talked about 10 million or 40 million for River Road, and we now would think we got a plan that for $700,000, we can at least get it up and running so that we have two means of egress from that area in Southbury. It's an operating road.
Jack,
Yeah.
let me try, I want
Go
to answer
ahead.
your question. 'Cause,
Yeah.
no, not gonna- not-
All right. And I know it's the 11th hour,
That's okay. That's why we're here. That's why we're here.
I figure we've got
let-
until about 9:10.
We do.
We got till midnight.
Because the basketball game starts at 9:20, 10 minutes to get
Oh,
home.
my goodness, I forgot about that.
Do you have a plane to catch tonight, John?
An eclipse?
Do the math over there and tell me what we're dealing with. There are some bridge things. He is our designated bridge and road guy.
Road
so
and bridge guy.
He's the guy, and he understands deeper than any of us what the words we're using mean. Let's talk about what you understand about things that might work in the future to Blake's advantage for lower cost. Just like we anticipate the stuff, the earmarks, we also anticipate what it's going to cost to do all these bridges, which are on the 10-year plan. We have a 30-year plan somewhere, but this is what's going to have to done in the next 10 years. Here is the current estimate. The current estimate. As I understand it, and these estimates of these 570 are not indexed for inflation, which is a problem, but the 570 to begin with is it design build?
Well, I think the 570, they were 350
Yeah,
a year ago.
yeah.
They were indexed up to 570 because of our experience, I think, on Purchase Brook.
It is, it's 50% funding of what our anticipated cost was for Purchase Brook.
It's what funding?
50% funding of what our anticipated costs were for Purchase Brook.
Spruce, well, what
Purchase
is-
Brook is the bottom one.
that's this one?
No,
Or this
that one.
This one?
Yeah.
Yep.
That one is based on the quote, actual cost, less 50% because we got money
Yes.
from the state.
Yep.
So we think, if that's the net actual,
But Blake's looking at it and realizing that there's some things we could be doing differently on some of these other culverts. I mean, none of the 570s and 750s are they're really they're big box culverts. They're not what you'd think of as a bridge like Rochambeau Bridge or Heritage Road Bridge where you got a span and
Jack,
a column.
okay.
Go ahead.
What might Spruce Brook be if the things that Blake is talking about what are they? What is a reasonable chance that they'll come to fruition, and what would the number be? Because if you've got some numbers, someone's gonna put a stake in the ground.
I've heard a number of 400, but it's Blake's number that is important, not Jack's representation of what he's heard from Blake or other people.
Blake is very conservative. and rightfully, he doesn't want to be wrong and give us a low number and be caught. No question about that. On the other side, we don't have the ability facing taxpayers in a mill rate to be that cautious. We have to stick our head out a little. So my question is, if this number is 450, what's halfway between 400 and 580? Someone do the math quick. 490, okay, 490. If this number is 490, and,
All the other 570.
well, and the question is, should the 490 be incremented 5% a year each?
Yeah, there's that question.
That's a little bit. So let's say this number, Dan, could you go do this for us?
Sure.
Could you change this number from 570 to 490? Could you change the next one to 2% more, 500, change that 5, okay? Change that to 490, change that one to 500. Change, this is 1, 2, don't do anything down there yet. No, leave that one, Betsy, because that one is firm. That one's firm. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times 5 is 30, plus compounding 40. 40% more than 500 is 700, correct? 400? So make that one 700, Betsy? Yes, and Dan, would you make that one 700?
What was your interest rate?
5% a year,
Oh,
compounded.
okay.
And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 20% more, 150, 150, so that'd be 850. Make that one 850. Okay, Dan, are you doing this?
Yep.
Now, what happens is, you don't see, that's increased expenditures. Here is the funding mechanism. This is the balance. Dan, where are these balances out here at the end or in the middle?
At the last year, we're at 233,949.
233,000?
Yep.
Where are we here?
831,949.
Our target is usually an average spend, so let's say the average spend in this balance would be $700,000. So Dan, change this 250 up here. Here's the funding. Oh, that's not going to help.
No, I would recommend we don't adjust funding in the bridge reserve solely because we front the money for all of these bridges. And if we make this account, let's say $500,000, and we're doing the bridge, the one-lane bridge is gonna be $8.5 million that we're gonna front some of that money. So we can't draw this reserve down to negative because we can't have a negative reserve fund. So I wouldn't adjust the funding at all in this fund at all.
Does that
think
include
that's
not
it.
increasing it by inflation? Would you leave it all flat, or
I
would
would
you
leave it
increase
all
by?
flat. I would leave it all as we have it. I think we had a good strategy. We have a good strategy every year looking at this, and we never have a problem with it. I wouldn't adjust this at all.
I understand. There's always another way. I think, let me finish this, and I think we might come to your answer a different way, if I might. So, in order to keep this number not to go below 1 million, okay? Would you change the
I
annual?
would take out the additional funding,
But
the
that's
250s.
coming out, that doesn't help the
of
mill rate.
unassigned.
Could
But
you,
if you would take those out, the additional funding, you'll see those bottom numbers reduce significantly. And that's where the issue is gonna be.
I hear you, but to Jack's point, if we take this number out, which is in the earmarks, we're only gonna save 40% of it, which is $100,000.
Right. Agreed.
Okay?
Yep.
And in order to save anything significant, Dan, would you take that out, please? And then, on here, on there, would you please take it out over there? And then, would you lower the 250 here to 100? Now, and does that automatically change across, Dan?
It does, but that's if we continue with the additional funding every year, which
Yes,
we had that in there because of the two-lane bridge.
but is that in your spreadsheet here?
Not. And if we do that, I took them out. If we do that, it takes the next year, the reserve is negative. That's why every year we talk about this. I would never touch this reserve fund, just because we're only putting $250,000. The
John,
impact to budget is minimal, because we budgeted $250 last year. And so by reducing the $250, it's only gonna hurt us first of all, when we go through our audit, because we can't have a negative fund balance in this fund.
Dan, there's another way to we can go borrow the money at 3%.
But why would we do that, John,
When you
when
don't
we
have
have
to.
the money and we're having zero increase in the budget? I don't understand why we would even attempt to do that. Because if we budgeted $250 last year for bridges, we're budgeting $250 for this year, the increase is zero. So why would we adjust this when there's other ways we can reduce this budget? I don't understand why we would even adjust this one.
It's one way. It is one way.
there is, I think, one other thing we should think about, and I've said this a couple times, on the reserves, okay? We have these reserves invested. We make interest on them. My view is, since we do not project the costs with inflation, and I've said this, Dan and I have talked about this, I know it's a problem accounting-wise, but why don't we take the income that we earn on each of these reserve funds, and instead of using that income to reduce the tax rate, okay, and I'm just talking about the income on the reserve funds, okay, and take the income at the annual rate we have earned over the last, when we close the books, okay, allocate that proportionately to each reserve fund,
John,
which
I'm
now
sorry.
pushes up your value and decreases the difference between what we have and what we projected and what's going to have to be come up with. It's just an approach.
It is, but it would cost the taxpayers today, because that $500,000 in income over time would come out of today's mill rate and be appropriated over time. We tried it, John, and it doesn't work.
You pick it up one
doesn't
side
work.
and lose it on the other side.
And the thing we lose is today, all of it,
You lose
rather
it
than
today.
phasing it out. You gotta do the worksheet and see how it works. We tried that, and it doesn't work. It cost us today in the mill rate. Well, Dan's not live, and we can't do this way. My point, Jack, is if we took the 250, did power go out?
You took 350 out.
I guess our batteries did.
You're working, John.
If we took,
Try it again. There you go.
oh,
You're there.
if we could take the 250 out as a one-time, and that would reduce, that would reduce this thing by 250 until next year. If you wanted to, quote, push the can down the road. Dan is telling us, and I think he's right, well, we don't see all these numbers. I'm sorry, I can't do this faithfully here without looking at the spreadsheet, which has all these numbers, and see how much annual funding we have to do, and how often we're gonna have to take 250 out of the annual surplus. Just like with the pension, what we're saying here is, we know we're gonna have a surplus. We're gonna understand that every year we're gonna have to take 250 out of that surplus and apply it to these bridges. And you could do that once this year. It's a tenth of a mil. It's a tenth of a mil. It would not destroy what Dan doesn't want to do it at all, and I understand that. but we could do it a one-time shot. And because if we did it here, we're only gonna save $100,000 in the mill rate, because it's 40%. Remember, this is an earmark? So only 40% of the earmark drills down, so that's a $100,000 saving.
But you made it 250 by taking 150 out of the annual appropriation, too.
That is a concern to me, because then next year, we gotta get back up to 250. You're kicking the can down the road, because you really need the 250 to maintain this scheme. So,
But we're unlikely to have two surprises next year, like we've had this year. It's a way of softening the surprise on the taxpayers.
surprise of the taxpayers.
I think, personally, I think if you look at the Board of Finance and what these budgets have done, what has been shown over the last 9 budgets, starting out with the first one I did all the way forward to this one,
33, 50,
you're trying, I think the taxpayers of this town will look at this budget, the municipal budget,
16.
and recognize the different, what has happened to make this the perfect storm with the ambulance and with other things. I think changing your formulas that have worked for almost decades for I think this should be something that, should the budget fail, and you are left with a difficult decision, should the municipal budget fail, of having to make those decisions, you may want to prepare for that because you have 2 weeks. But I think the taxpayers may surprise you on the municipal side in order of what you would need to do. Because then you're being forced by the voters to take a different approach. I think that's the voice of the people to make that difference, given that there has been, the past number of years, very, very reliable, smooth, and high quality of life with the services that have been delivered. This is just 1 year out of the last 9. And I think unless you're forced to make that decision, I wouldn't deviate from the formulas that have been proven.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. I'm not trying to change the formulas, I'm trying to use the formulas in just a slightly different manner, because I know that we've got monies earmarked or planned for that are in excess of what we're gonna need in some places. But this year, we've got 2 big surprises that have both gone against. That's all. And if we think there is any sort of likelihood that the voters will reject the budget, then the voice inside my head saying to me, you should have anticipated that and dealt with it up front. I mean, one approach is, let's wait, see what happens with the budget. But if we thought that there was a 50-50 or even lower likelihood of passage, then I think probably we have a responsibility to try to make it right the first time and avoid the extra $20,000 of a second vote.
I hear you.
And I know the school budget is a whole, it could throw us into tilt all by itself.
I think I'd like to take a different view. We've got a 3.15% increase basically, plus an ambulance situation.
And a River Road situation. Well, no, you're right, plus an ambulance situation,
Plus an ambulance situation
$400,000.
of $400,000. And because of that, we've got this plan. I don't like kicking the can down the road. I just don't. Because the next year, it always comes back to bite you and makes the next years even harder. And that's one of the reasons we've been so successful over the years. We don't kick the can down the road, we take them as they come. If the taxpayers, again, 3.15 and 400, those are my two numbers. Fundamental budget and an
Plus
ambulance.
400.
And the ambulance for 400.
Yep.
Those are the two numbers. For me, that is an extremely responsible budget to go to the taxpayers with. If they tell us that they don't agree, that 3.15 plus 400 in this year with less revenues, with a school shift, with the school budget, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If they tell us, no, we realize it's responsible, but this year, please, no. Well, I think that's when we should do some of this, if they vote it down. If they tell us no, they're just stuck. This is so responsible. Through no fault of any of ours and a lot of work on everyone else's part. So
Will we communicate it that way? 3.15 plus
I would love to.
400 for ambulance?
I would
Is
love
what this
to.
budget is? The municipal budget?
I would love to do it that
I'd
way.
recommend we do it that way.
Because that's the truth. That's what it
because
is.
People want ambulance services.
They do.
They need ambulance services.
Also understanding that if that number had stayed in the original funding number for the paramedic that we were paying for, stayed in that budget, we wouldn't be seeing that increase, even with the normal rate of inflation of I think it was 300,000. So how many, if that 300,000 had stayed in the budget, and you would
That's true. People forget the money we saved in the
saved
past.
300,000, so
don't wanna
that
know about
number
it.
had stayed in, you would not have, it would only be $100,000
More. That's correct.
more.
That's correct.
But we took credit for that benefit 2 years ago and
Well, we
gotta
couldn't
move
not
on.
do that. We couldn't leave money in there. That was irresponsible to leave that number in there. But
Okay.
is what it
We
is.
finally have to.
I'm with you.
Fish or cut bait here.
So I'd like to
Kim?
understand, so we have the additional pension funding for $440,000 that we're anticipating that we're going to need to take out of the unassigned fund for how long, Dan? 5 more years, 4 more years? This year and like 3, 4 more?
Say it, I'm sorry, I'm not,
The additional funding for the pension
yeah?
that's that's earmarked for the unassigned fund,
Yeah.
right? And we have an estimate that we're going to need to do that again for the next, how many years?
Next 5 years? Yeah.
Next 5 years. And then we've got the $250,000 that we're putting into the bridge fund for
Uh-huh.
the next 4 years.
Yeah.
If there's the possibility that the ambulance could be a temporary expense, why wouldn't it be treated like these other over expenses that we're not putting into the budget?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, John, at one point you talked to me a little bit about doing something like that, is presenting the budget with the ambulance separate.
The issue would be with that is it appears the way things are going that the ambulance is gonna be an ongoing
Yeah,
town
yes,
expenditure.
For sure.
It doesn't look like it's gonna be a one-time. I think it
Or
looks like it's gonna be
4-time or
ongoing.
5-time? Because these are
Ongoing.
all long-term expenses that we're anticipating for the next 4 and 5 years.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm convinced it's forever, and it's going to increase. Regression to the mean is the natural order of things. We're going to be at $35 per capita in the next 3 years because the government is, well, who knows? Who knows? Why should we be the lowest per capita town in the sample? We're just lucky. Well, for whatever reason.
Would this be a good year, though, to split it, maybe? Do half through the unassigned fund and maybe half through a budget line item, so that we can get some of that 1.8% difference divided? I mean, even though
You're way ahead of
overall
me.
it's not so much percentage-wise, but there are people who are hit particularly hard with the reevaluation.
That gets to the timing of when we do something.
Do we do it
And-
now, or do we do it after a rejection?
I would hate to do it now because we have a $400,000 ambulance service issue, and we have a 3.15% increase in total government in this inflationary environment after a similarly low budget last year. These guys have put together an exceptional budget. And my conscience would bother me if we somehow said to them, no, we don't agree. I can't see what they've done wrong.
It's not changing the amount of funding at all. It's respecting the amount of funding and respecting the additional funding that Board of Finance agreed was helpful for maintaining the ambulance facilities. It's changing where it's coming from. And
I think I have an answer to your question. Why don't we use the total 400 for the ambulance as an earmark? You can't do that with the whole budget.
Yeah,
There's no end to that.
right, and then I
So-
said possibly split it. What if we split it?
Yeah, sure, you could,
split it
but
where,
that just
split it.
splits something that, in my judgment, shouldn't be split. Maybe a more valid question is,
Well, we're splitting the
Why-
pension.
excuse me?
We're splitting the pension, we're splitting the
Well,
bridges.
I was about to say that, Kim. Why on earth did we do the pension thing? Okay? Back when we did that, we had a concept of the past service liability in the pension and the future service liability in the pension. And we put the past service liability in the pension to be funded by prior taxpayers, the general fund, the unassigned general fund. We let the current budget amount going forward be paid by current people. So that was a different concept than just picking something and funding it some other way. So there was a rationale at the time that made sense. Now, granted, that starts us, as you could see, maybe on a slippery slope. We could do it with anything. We could do the whole damn budget.
Well, I mean,
of
it is
course not.
for emergencies, right? I mean, it is for the unexpected, which this kind of was, the unassigned fund.
Well, while it was unexpected this year, to Jack's point, shame on us, we should have known 5 years ago when she said she could do it we were doing it for 280, and she says, I'll do it for nothing. Maybe we should have scratched our head and said, maybe we should fund this going forward because
Well, she did
she's
for a
not right.
while. She did as long as she could.
Or maybe,
At least accrued some monies
or should,
to soften the
or soften the blows. Mr. Hill would never let us build a fund to soften the blow
hear him
over
speaking.
time. He would have yelled and screamed, and so would
And
John.
we did
Yeah,
have- We did
I,
have that with ARPA, right?
so
I mean,
would
ARPA
Tom.
covered some of it, so.
John, I think
We-
the approach you talk about trying to sell the 3.1 and so forth. If I were a taxpayer, and given what happened last year with the reassessment, and with a huge, huge increase in values, that was
John-
disproportionately, just let me finish, disproportionately spread out, okay? I think when voters look this year, they're gonna look at one number. They're gonna look at that 7.4 or whatever percent it is, including the school. Okay? They're not gonna, I don't think they're gonna focus on the 3.1, and they're gonna look at a 7% tax increase after so many of them, especially the 65 and overs that live, in Heritage Village on fixed incomes, they really got clobbered, and now they're gonna be clobbered with another 7% plus on top of that. So I'm just thinking that what are voters going to look at? And I think the voters, when they go to the polls, they're gonna focus on that 7% plus increase, not the 3.1% or whatever you wanna say for the town. That's what I think they're gonna look at.
For sure.
What happens?
And then there are two budgets they vote on, the town budget and the school budget. And who knows what low information, high information voters will be thinking when they go into the polls. We'll find out.
We will on the 6th.
I guess my recommendation is we go with what we have here, the 3.1 plus 400. Because I don't hear anyone talking about a whole lot of other things they want to pay attention to, and so that's what it. So what if we need a motion, and what you said. Dan, the motion would be to recommend a local government budget of, what's the number?
We make changes, because
Something looks weird here. Don't say, can you just cut out of this? Don't save anything you did and go back? Does that work?
yeah, I have it right here. It's,
You have the right number?
yeah, it's 23,683,449.
Can you just close it and not say?
Close it, don't save it, and bring it back. So I guess Kathy is making a motion
It's right there.
to,
That's the right one.
where it is?
Yeah, that's correct.
23,683, 449.
449. Yep.
Where is it?
I like that.
23,683.
20, Kathy, we have a motion for Kathy to recommend to the town meeting 23,683,449.
You also have to vote the special revenue funds as well.
Yes, we will do. As a separately,
Yep.
or together?
You can vote them together. but
Let's
they have
let's
to
do
be
it
voted.
separately. We'll talk about the special revenue fund in a minute. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Thank you, John. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Hearing none. We also need a motion for the special revenue budget. For you first-timers here, the town is the custodian for money held by all these, for all these interests. This is non-taxpayer money, but the town attorney has told us that because the town is the custodian of this money, that the town rules for dispersing the money must be followed. That means we have to follow the purchasing standards, and we have to have an appropriation. The appropriation happens at budget time. When there is when the wording for the motion for the budget comes out, it will say 23,684,000, whatever it is, and a special revenue fund appropriation of, and does it do the total?
We don't do a total.
We don't do the total. And appropriation of the special revenue funds. And because this is all in the backup, that authorizes this money to be spent by these organizations in accordance with the rubric, the written policy of who decides how to spend it. So now we need a motion to recommend to the town meeting the appropriation of the special revenue funds for fiscal year 24-25. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Jack. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Steve. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? So ordered. This is not a regular meeting. This is a special meeting. It is inappropriate to talk about anything else. And because we don't vote on adjournment anymore, according to Jack, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all. And don't forget to vote on the